Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Lara Cabeza, and I'm a product designer at EasyCater.
Hi, I'm Katie Langerman. I'm a UI engineer at Car Gurus.
Hi, and I'm Olga Profilieva, and I'm also a product designer at EasyCater, just like Lara.
So the three of us co-organize Ladies at UX. For those of you who are new to our meetup, we're a monthly meetup group that celebrates and empowers women who work in the field of design. Our events are open to everyone to attend, but all of our speakers are women, and we're really excited to hear from some amazing women from KAYAK and OpenTable tonight.
If you haven't signed up for our newsletter yet, you can sign up on our website. It's ladies@uxboston.com. If you have some job postings that you want us to send out, please send that our way. There's a contact form on there. Just send us the listing and the title. Also, we are working on a mentorship program. Some of you might be aware of that. We're currently looking for a few more mentors. So if that's something that interests you, please find us after and let us know or send us an email.
All right. I'm going to announce three things. So the first thing is that last month we started a new segment. It is called Open Mic. We just wanted to encourage the audience to make any announcements. Are there any announcements that you would like to say right now? Anybody?
We'll bring the microphone to you.
Anybody has any company announcements, any exciting job announcements? All right.
I just want to say hi, my name is Victoria. This is my first time at one of these events, so I want to introduce myself. I'm also looking for a role currently in UX. I'm trying to transition from SEO, so anything maybe that would utilize both of those things, like UX writing. If anyone knows of any opportunities, I'd love to hear about them. Thanks.
Awesome. Welcome, Victoria.
Anybody else?
Got it. We're all set. Hey, everyone. I made the same announcement a month ago, so you may remember me, but I work with Lara and Olga at EasyCater, and we are hiring for a growth designer. It's a really exciting role. It's going to be a new role at EasyCater. It's on the product team, but helps support our marketing team and growth. So if you're interested, speak to one of us at the end of the event. Thanks.
Thank you, Kara. Anybody else? All right.
Okay.
Are there any other people that are looking for jobs? Raise your hand. Right. Wonderful. Any people that are their companies are hiring? All right. Take a look around the room and make sure you connect. Wonderful. Okay. And lastly, I would like to thank our amazing photographer, Jason Ma. Jason, where are you? Let's give him a round of applause. Yeah, you can check out the pictures a couple days later. They're going to be posted on our Instagram and Facebook. And last time, Jason joined us as a volunteer, and he did an amazing job. So check out those photos.
Okay, and finally, before we get started, we want to say a big thank you to KAYAK for sponsoring our event tonight and for hosting us here. We're so grateful for you, for all of the support you've given us for women in design and for diversity in tech. So thank you so much. A round of applause for KAYAK. All right, and now we're going to hand things over to Iskra.
Hi, everyone. My name is Iskra, and I'm a product designer at KAYAK, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. So as you already saw, our topic for the day is humanizing our work, humanizing our product, and all of our topics are going to be sort of talking about different ways, whether it's UX or just like cultural ways that we work towards making our product more accessible, more human-like. So we're going to start today with Irene, who's a senior product designer at KAYAK. Irene?
Hi, thank you. Hello. Oh, I think this is the schedule. um, okay, so designing for users or humans, accessibility not as an edge case, but as a human case. So, hello, my name is Irene or Irene, if you can handle that. I'm a senior product designer at KAYAK. I've been here for 3 years and I work on flights. And this is my most used emoji. And today we're going to be talking about inclusive design and accessibility and how we need to treat accessibility not just as an edge case, but mainly as a human case. I assume most of us here might have some sort of user in your job title, user interface, user experience. The word user has been used so many times to describe the people who are using our websites. And the thing with that is by using the word user, we might be biased to create what we think is the average user. But when it comes to people, there's no such thing as normal or average. And labeling users, humans as users strips them off of their complexities. It reduces humans to a single behavior whose sole purpose is to use a product. The interactions with design, with technology, heavily depend on the human abilities and our senses, on what we can see, hear, speak, touch, and assuming that all of these abilities are fully enabled at all times might create a problem because we might be ignoring much of the range of humanity. So the definition of what is a disability. Disability is a mismatched interaction between the features of a person's body and the environment or society in which they live. Whereas inclusive design is a methodology that we use to improve the inclusivity of our process. And to give you an example, let's say you go to a restaurant, let's say you're vegan and there is nothing on the menu. So you decide to go with the chicken salad, but ask them to remove the chicken. And when the waiter comes, you realize that there's actually still chicken in your salad. So you send it back and you ask them to send you a vegan without chicken salad. So 20 seconds later, they bring you the same dish with just the chicken removed. Well, that is not vegan. Vegan is how you start cooking from the beginning. And that's exactly what inclusive design is. You cannot just add it later on. That needs to be part of the process. And so cooking is the methodology, inclusive design, whereas the attribute is accessibility, like vegan or allergies. And we're going to see some myths about why and how we treated inclusive design more as an afterthought. So myth number one. Disability is a permanent personal health condition. Well, that is actually the old definition that defines disability as a personal health condition that needs to be diagnosed by a doctor. But the new definition reframes disability to heavily depend on the context, on the environment in which we live in. And as people move through the environment, their abilities can also change. So here on Earth, we have different abilities than we would on the moon. And what we see here is an example of what that means. So somebody with a permanent disability would have one arm, whereas somebody with a temporary disability might have an arm injury. And there's also the situational, which might be a new parent or somebody who's carrying grocery shopping. But the main thing here, what I wanted to get from this is that all of these have the same disability, that it can only use one arm. The same with hearing. The permanent disability is somebody who's deaf, temporary, somebody who has an ear infection, And situational, if you're at a nightclub and you can't hear a thing, it's the same. Same with vision. Somebody with a permanent disability, they're blind, or temporary, they might have a cataract, and situational, it might be a distracted driver. So what we see here is that disability is not really a personal health attribute. It's more about the environment. It's more about the society. Myth number 2 is that most of us don't need inclusive design. Well, if you take a moment and consider of all the times that you've actually used a solution that was designed for somebody with a disability, and if you have trouble, for example, the curb cut is a very popular one. This was originally designed for people on wheelchairs, but it actually also helps people with strollers, bicycles, or skateboards. Same with high contrast screen settings. This was originally created for blind people, but we also benefit from it if we're in bright sunlight and the screen automatically adjusts. Same for audiobooks. They were created for the blind, but we also benefit when we're driving a car or when we're walking. So designing with constraints might sound hard at first, but it actually puts us in a new context where we can innovate and create new ideas, approach the same problem from different perspectives so that we can create something that can be used by a range of humanity. And that way we can create the feeling of belonging so that everybody can participate in the experience. Myth number 3 is that disability only helps a small group of users. Well, if we actually add up the numbers, permanent disability is 26K, whereas temporary is 13 million, and situational was 8 million. That actually adds up to 21 million users. So that's not such a small user group. We're going to be looking at a case study that we did here at KAYAK. I've been working on this the past 5-6 months with Thayer and Georgiou, who are also designers of KAYAK. And we wanted to emphasize on vision because our brand color is quite vivid, and we've noticed that it has created some issues for people with low vision, and they couldn't really read the text from the background. So not sure if the people out there can read this. So what we did here from the first slide to the third is actually apply some of the Wcag standards rules, which is basically two very simple things. One is changing the color, changing the font size. And these two things, just these two small things, can dramatically change the readability and usability of your product. Now, the Wcag has some very specific rules, which is, for example, your text with the background needs to have at least 4.5 to 1 ratio in order to conform with an AA level. There's also a AAA level, but that's a bit harder to achieve, so AA is also okay. And I'm going to show you what the website looks like using this simulator. It's called Color Blindness Sim Daltonism, and you can download it. It's on the App Store. And this is what our website, KAYAK, used to be 10 months ago. This is what it looks for somebody with normal vision. And this is what it looks for somebody with protanopia and for somebody with monochromacy. Now, as you can see, it's kind of hard to read the text. Obviously, this is a huge screenshot, but on your screens, it's kind of hard to read the text out of the background. And we downloaded this plugin. There are so many plugins and websites out there where you can put the colors in and check. But this is one that we use. It's called Stark, and it's free. So what it does, it basically gives you the contrast ratio between the text and the background. And as you can see, this is 2.57. It's 2 points lower than the 4.5 that we saw earlier. And so what we did, we changed the colors and the design to try to increase the contrast. And this is what we came up with. This is actually what's live today. This is what it looks like for somebody with normal vision, protanopia, and monochromacy. And if you look at the contrast ratio, we managed to increase it to 10 times more. This is 19 to 1 with just this little change. And as I said, we also wanted to tweak the color palette as well. So we use this website that's called color.review. It's a pretty cool website. It's very easy. And we've been working very closely with them to try to make this color palette as accessible as possible while maintaining the playfulness, because you don't want everything to be dark and dull. And so you need to like fine tune everything and really go back and forth, but we did it. So hopefully you're all excited by now and you want to do this. So what should you do next? First of all, don't buy into the myths. We all create excuses about how we don't have the time, nobody cares in our organization, or it's really hard. But as product designers or managers or engineers, it's up to us. We have full control on what we're designing. Make sure that you talk to your peers, read the WCAG guidelines, get familiar with accessibility related terms and learn about the different disabilities. And really the most important thing is talking to the people on your team, talking to the managers, to the shareholders, getting them involved and getting them to care about this, because this is not just a team of one. This needs to be teamwork. Everybody needs to be held accountable. Even the way that we do research and testing, we sometimes place the users in this perfect room with the perfect light conditions, the perfect screen, and we kind of see them really focused using our product, but this is not how our users are actually using the product. They might be walking, they might be cooking, they might have a very terrible monitor so they can't read the colors or whatever is up there. So make sure that you include users with different abilities, or you test in different environments, different monitors. And if you haven't, I highly recommend using a screen reader and hear what your website sounds like for the blind, or try to navigate around just using only your keyboard. And if possible, observe people using assistive technology on your products. As I said before with the salads, it needs to be from the beginning, but obviously there are websites out there that are already built. So it's up to you to work on it and make it accessible. Either way, there is an afterthought or from the start, it's completely up to the designer. But more than those and compliant rules, isn't it just human to make sure that our products can be more widely used by humans? Thank you.
Thank you, Irene, and specifically, thank you for this very accessible last slide. Now we're going to continue with Becky Chen, who is also a senior product designer at KAYAK, and she's going to tell us a little something personal about her.
On the spot. Personal. Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm Becky Chen, like Iskra had said. I'm also a product designer here at KAYAK, and I've been here for about 2 years. And I'm now working on the mobile team, so a lot of the mobile app experiences I work on. I didn't mean to do that, so I'm just going to go back. But I have the privilege of kind of sharing my journey of navigating cultural differences in the workplace, and sort of finding my own voice through all of that. So this is me. A lot of people, when they first see this photo, they're like, oh, that's a really cute dress you're wearing, and your two brothers are adorable. And then I have to tell them, like, actually, I'm that kid on the left that looks like a boy, rocking a really cool cardigan and a bowl haircut. So I grew up in Wheaton, Illinois, which is a small city outside of Chicago. And demographics of Wheaton are about, if you look today, it's about 86% white. At the time when I was growing up, it's about 89%, and 2.8% Asian, with like an umbrella over all of the Asians. My parents were Taiwanese, so I consider myself Taiwanese American. And my parents did a really good job of nailing down this ideology of keep your head down, do hard work, do good work, get good grades, but keep a low profile. You don't want to cause too much conflict, just do well at school. But as you can see from this photo, I don't seem to ever fit in. So this is another example, and that's me, and this is Wheaton. This is a very, I guess, this is my varsity badminton team. But a lot of the students that I had grown up with were white. And I think from a young age, when you don't look like everyone else, you kind of learn to survive by assimilating. You do what is cool, you do what everybody else feels like is accepted, so that you're accepted. But the problem with that is, the problem with assimilating was that I found differentiating characteristics about me that they were negative, and I wanted to disassociate myself with anything that had to do with Taiwanese, because that was not cool at the time. For example, growing up, my dad was a cook. He owned a Taiwanese restaurant. It was pretty small, but he would cook these amazing lunches. Has anyone ever had like Taiwanese beef noodle soup before? Yes, life-changing. He packed that for me in this like really intricate mug with chopsticks. I brought it to school, opened it up, and everyone was like, "What is that? It smells so bad." To which I ended up not eating it, washed it down the toilet, and then went home and was like, "Never pack that for me again, Dad." And if anything, I had asked him to pack me just peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. That was all I ever wanted. So that was me. So fast forward a few years later, I'm out of college, and I kind of have a better understanding of myself and appreciation for my dual identities that I embody. But I couldn't shake this bad habit of still not feeling confident in voicing my opinions and thoughts. And I was pretty uncomfortable with, in open discussions, which grew more apparent when I entered grad school and in the workforce, especially in American culture, where individualism and free thought are valued characteristics. It was really hard for me to do a 180, and I still have a difficult time. I still struggle with it. But for example, in large meetings and discussions, I found it really difficult for me to speak up in fear of sticking out, because for the majority part of my life, I had tried not to stick out. But as you see, I was, so then what happened is, I started observing that people were validated for being extremely confident, extremely outspoken. People were being validated for voicing their opinions. I also noticed in my journey that there are very few types of people that look like me, and that held similar characteristics and personality traits and leadership. But what I did see in leadership were a lot of white men, especially in tech. So here I am as a young adult, and I'm still struggling and caught in between these two worlds again. And I found myself asking the wrong question, but who do I need to be to survive again? Luckily, I stumbled upon this book. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but it's called East Meets West by Yang Liu. And she is a graphic artist that moved from China to Berlin, I think around 13 years old. And basically what she does is she kind of creates graphic images to her perception of what was happening, to the culture clashes that she was feeling in Berlin. So I wanted to share a couple of images with you today because I'm able to relate heavily to them. So if you need more background information, the left is supposed to represent the Western culture and the right is supposed to represent Eastern culture. And I would assume that it's more related to East Chinese culture, but she doesn't actually write anything in the book. So it's kind of up to your own, you can make your own conclusions from that. But again, when I looked at this, based on the ideology of my upbringing, I totally related to the image on the right, where my culture had prioritized community over individualism. There's also a study that was done while I was doing sort of researching this talk, but Western participants were more likely to overestimate their abilities in the workplace, while Eastern participants were more likely to underestimate their abilities. So this was just a small piece of evidence that I was like, okay, maybe I'm not crazy. This is another image where Eastern versus Western differences in viewing authority. In Western tends to value flatter hierarchies. It's kind of exemplified through our open offices, where your boss is your buddy, you call them by their first name. And then even in KAYAK, like our CTO sits like a desk or two away, which is totally not intimidating at all. But in Eastern culture, for lack of better words, I was brought up to fear my grandparents. Like, it was very scary talking to them. It was also very scary talking to my Chinese teacher and pastor and anybody else who is above me. And so, again, another piece of evidence where I was like, okay, maybe there's something onto this about culture. And the last image here is, you'll see on the top left, it says anger. So, the way that our cultures express emotion is very different, where in Western cultures, there's a certain sign of respect for being honest and expressing your true feelings in the moment. Where in Eastern cultures, that might not always be the truth for us, where I think we respect honesty, but it's common to kind of bypass the truth a little bit to help people save face. And basically saving face is a common Eastern sign of respect to not embarrass or shame people that you're in front of. So there are dual tactics of dealing with truth here. So after flipping through a couple of these images, I was realizing that there's nothing inherently wrong with me, right? It's just people and cultures that do things differently. And so there was kind of a turning point for me throughout my career where I was taking this information and started to become empowered by that, and to identify my differences as extra tools that I had to communicate with a lot of different people. Two people that I kind of wanted to share about that were kind of instrumental to my work as I was pursuing this design journey. The first is Georgiou, and she is currently the VP of product design at Facebook. But at the time when I kind of stumbled upon her blog, she was just like a random person in the world writing about her experiences starting in the workforce, and I think she was like 25 at the time. And she writes this really great blog. It's called The Year of the Looking Glass, and that's kind of how I stumbled upon her. And she writes about her experiences being Asian American woman in tech, her experience as a product designer and now manager and now VP of whatever. So it's been really cool to kind of reference that along the way. The next person on the right she's Lena Wen, and at the time I was in Baltimore going to grad school, and Lena Wen was appointed the first Asian Baltimore Health Commissioner, which is kind of crazy for Baltimore. But at the time, I just heard about her in the news, and I was like, hey, she looks like me, and she's like in this really important role, so I'm going to Google her, and then I started to follow her. So these people have no idea that I'm like including them in a presentation, and I've never talked to them, but they're still very important to me because of who they are and the way that they have shared their stories with the world and how I relate to a lot of what they do. So it's important for me to see women like Julie and Lena in positions of leadership. But for me, it's not about leadership, it's about visibility. And I appreciate the way that they've been able to be open and candid, maybe more so for Julie because she kind of just started the blog. So I know that diversity and inclusion is like kind of a hot topic in tech right now. And it's a hot topic because we're really bad at it, and we're forced to be better at it. But aside from all of the company benefits, where performance increases, finance increases, you're innovative. For me, it's about categorizing myself as an example of someone being influenced by people like them. So in our shared stories, I'm able to validate my own story. So one more person that I wanted to highlight, this is Deb Liu. She's VP of Marketplace at Facebook. Honestly, I don't really care much about the title, more so than their story. But I was kind of researching this talk and came across a really cool article that she had wrote with very, very similar experiences of finding her own voice and having the same background. So this quote, she says, "I held myself apart from others in order to protect myself. And in the end, the failure to speak up was costing more than the safety of being silent." And for me, the main takeaway for this is, when I choose not to be vocal due to my own insecurities, my own lack of confidence, I immediately disqualify myself from the audience. And I'm failing myself and also potentially failing people that could benefit from this. So that leads me to why I'm here talking today. And yeah, I kind of wanted to wrap up this talk with my own interpretation of Yang Liu's style of design. So, and also the limitations that Google Slide gave me as an artist. But this is kind of how I would describe my current state of mind. And my main point is, whether you're from, associate with Western culture or Eastern culture, whether you're male, female, queer, straight, our shared stories are very important. And if we want to get closer to closing that diversity gap that all the tech places are fussing up about right now, I think one of the really small but simple things we could be doing is just sharing your story. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Becky. Now we're going to continue with two UX copywriters that flew all the way from San Francisco to be here with us today. They're part of OpenTable. That's Jennifer Bader and Brittany Melo, who are going to talk to us a little bit about UX copywriting. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jennifer Bader. And I'm Brittany Melo. And this is the clicker that we need. So the topic of our talk today is on using language to humanize products. And this is Brittany. We're going to begin, actually, we're going to share a story in 3 parts. I'm going to give you some background context.
And I'm going to jump right into tips and how we do content strategy.
And then I'll finish up by speaking about process. So to begin, given that we're talking about humanizing language, I wanted to make sure, actually, I'm going to pause for a second. I'm hearing an echo. Are you guys? Let's just see. I wanted to make sure that we all have a common understanding of this word, humanize. Humanize means to make humane, kind, or gentle. And humane is characterized by compassion and sympathy, especially for the suffering and distressed. Now, with all of us in the UX arena, our intention is to release products that help people do what they need to do and make their lives easier. But the fact is that sometimes we release product that actually causes stress. One of the reasons for this, when it comes to language, is that there's a lack of oversight of words and content across UX systems. Now, in companies, it's been standard practice for a long time that people hire specialists to work on marketing copy, blog posts, ad campaigns, emails, things like that. But for some reason, when it came to the UX interface, they left it to the hands of people that were working on the product. So that might be engineers, designers, product managers, and it shows, quite frankly. I remember the first time I encountered a 404 error screen. I wasn't working in tech, and I had no idea what that meant. The screen just said 404 error. I was like, great, there's an error that happened. I have no context for it. I don't understand why the error happened, and I don't understand what to do next. So a way to address this, and thankfully companies, more and more companies are coming to this understanding, is that, hey, let's employ specialists, people that specifically focus on language and content across the user journey. And the result is there are a number of different roles and titles that people have that focus on this. I want to get a sense of who's here in the audience and how many of you are familiar with one or more of these titles. Awesome, that's great. How many of you have worked with people that have one of these titles? Fewer, but still some. And how many of those people, how many of you work within that role? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's a burgeoning field. And because of that, and because it's rapidly growing, one thing you'll find is that people use these different titles to mean different things. Sometimes, like at Facebook, they refer to everyone that works on copy as a content strategist. Whereas at OpenTable, Brittany and I are called UX writers. And as part of our work, we do develop content strategy, but because we're really embedded in the product, we're thought of and we think of ourselves as UX writers. But I just want to point out, when you hear these terms, depending upon who's saying it, depending upon the company, it can mean different things. One thing you'll notice is that I did not use the term copywriter. And this is, again, there's variants about this, and I'm smiling over here at Jamie, who's the product writer for KAYAK, because I know that he uses this term. But I like to make the distinction between copywriters and people that are working within UX. And the way I approach this is I associate copywriters with people who are often on marketing teams, and their role is to promote the product. Whereas someone that's working within UX, their role is to make sure that people can navigate and flow through the product in a very easeful way. So that's where I make the distinction. Not everyone does, but I want you to understand that because this is a newer field, the first conference for people that do what we do happened in 2010. So that gives you a sense of how new the field is, and also that it's changing very quickly. So a lot of companies, and maybe even some of you, say, what's the big deal? Why do we really need to hire someone that focuses specifically on this? Writing is easy, anyone can do it. It's true. Writing is easy. Most of us know how to write. But I want to share an example with you that illustrates this point about what the big deal is. When Haiti had its earthquake, it was the second largest earthquake ever recorded in history. The devastation was incredible, and there was an immense need to help people. So former presidents Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. I knew that didn't sound right. George Clinton is a funk singer, if anyone you know him. He's awesome. So Bill Clinton and George W. Bush gathered together. They assembled a small team, and they quickly created the Clinton-Bush Haiti Fund. And because the team was very scrappy and the need was very great, they released a website that gave people around the world an opportunity to submit funds. So this is an example of what they released. And then after they released it, they thought, okay, what can we do here to make sure this is reaching people in a better way? They knew there was a lot of people that felt very, had a lot of empathy for what was going on and wanted to help. But the amount of money they were raising was not anywhere near where they thought it should be. So they took a look about what they released, and they decided to tweak the button that said submit. So you'll see here the submit button. They tweaked it. They changed the label from submit to support Haiti. Now, if we look at this support Haiti, what that does is it brings a more humanistic approach to what happens when you select that button. Submit, that could mean anything. Support Haiti means I'm helping out. That difference, combined with a few other minor tweaks, was $1 million. And $1 million to people in life or death situations can literally mean someone either lives or dies. So words do matter. So that I shared one example of how words matter, and Brittany's going to get into some more tips and things you can keep in mind when you're working on copy.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks for that. So yeah, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we approach problems in content strategy and just some general tips that we give designers, PMs, developers when they're short on resources or we can't get to a project, which happens a lot of the time because content strategists are very slim in our company. So the main thing is to know your audience. So I work on the diner side, which is the consumer facing. Jen works on the restaurant side. So our persona is a little bit different. These I pulled from the diner side. So there's 4 types of diners that we experience when we are designing for any consumer products. And so there's the connoisseur, the connector, the scenester, and the pragmatic. And so if you look at these, they're all very different, but the one thing they have in common is that they all want a good meal. And so they all are coming to OpenTable to book restaurants and have a good experience and have a personalized experience that makes them feel special and makes them feel good about the decisions that they're making on OpenTable. And so our kind of the way that we tackle it is we want to make sure that we're still remaining true to our voice and tone and to our brand guidelines, but we want to make sure that they're blending to reach all of these different personas in the same way, but also making them feel special. So we're trying to find a way to craft the language to make sure that everyone feels included, that we're making sure that everyone from different demographics is having the same experience on OpenTable. And then another tip is that we need to understand the journey. And I know that this is probably resonating with a lot of designers as well. Every time that a user comes on your app or on your desktop or anything, any platform, you want to make sure that you're taking them through a really seamless journey and that you're aware of what part of the journey they are at and that you're not being redundant or annoying, or I can go on and on. But you want to make sure that you're very aware of their emotional state in each part of that journey. And so, for example, when a diner comes on OpenTable, they're usually looking to book. They're not really sure half the time what they want to eat. And so we want to make sure that we kind of hold their hand and help them find the best restaurant for them in that moment. Whereas somebody who has just paid is leaving the restaurant and we want them to leave a review for the restaurant, we want to make sure that timing is right and that we're not asking them to leave a review while they're still at dinner, because that just wouldn't make sense. And so timing is key there. We want to make sure that we follow up with them. We know that they ate at a restaurant. We want to follow up and say, hey, how was your dinner? And making sure that the timing is right on both of our ends. And then a huge thing, especially for content strategy, is to be cohesive. And so Jen and I are both lucky to overlook all of our platforms. And so we are able to see kind of what's happening on desktop, on Android, on iOS. And so we want to make sure that everything is consistent from device to device. So if a user is using their phone earlier in the day to book a table, and then they go later in the day to go check up on that reservation on their desktop, we want to make sure that they're seeing kind of the same themes, the same terminology, nothing's really changing, and we want to make sure that they understand that we are the same company, the same brand throughout their entire experience on OpenTable. And with that being on brand, like I touched on earlier, is just making sure that voice and tone is similar and that we're remaining true to our brand. And then a huge thing for content is to make sure that we are always driving action. So we always want to make sure that we guide the user to a goal. So we don't want to just provide them with some random thing that we want them to do and not really explain where they're going to be going to next. We want to provide some sort of indication, like what the CTA they will be clicking or what action they will be taking will guide them to the screen that they will be seeing next. So an example here is when we want a user to make a reservation, instead of having a CTA that says reservation, what does that mean? That means nothing to a user. We want to drive an action and say book a table. So that way when they click the CTA, they know exactly what they'll be seeing next. They'll be seeing some sort of search results page that will lead them to eventually booking a table. And then Steve Jobs could not have said it better himself, but people just don't read anymore. And we know that. I know designers probably know that in terms of making things really succinct, making sure that we have brevity. And so for content, we want to make sure that we tell a story through bullets, headlines, bolded words. We don't want to slap some long form writing on a page and expect a user to know exactly what we're saying. So we really want to make sure that we highlight the most important pieces through just short form writing, through quick, easy snippets, because we don't know if the user is busy, if they're on a bus. Like, not everyone has time to sit there and read a novel on OpenTable. So we really want to make sure that we're providing everything in a really digestible format. And then just a little exercise I wanted to do with you guys. I'm going to show you this first screen here for about 10 seconds. So just take a look at it for a little bit. So does anyone have any takeaways from what they saw from that screen? Like, what was that screen about? Yeah. Food preferences? Okay, yeah. And then I'm going to show you just the screen. So it's the same screen, it's just formatted a little bit differently. It was probably, I'll go back, probably a lot easier to read what's going on. A lot of times users will get really distracted by a bunch of content in the beginning, and then basically it's the same thing repeating itself. So this is an example of how content hierarchy can really come into play in breaking up the way that we're phrasing things and really highlighting and bolding the certain things that we want to put emphasis on, just to increase readability and making it really easy for a user to scan through and just click the toggles as they go without having to be stumped by long writing that no one wants to read. I'm going to hand it back to Jen to talk about the process of working with the content strategist.
Great. Thanks, Brittany. So Brittany touched on just a few things that people, UX writers, content strategists think about. But one thing that I want to emphasize is this, it sounds very simple, very straightforward, but in fact, there's a lot of thought and consideration that goes into word choices. It's necessary to understand psychology. I've even started reading and learning about neuroscience because I want to understand how people's brains work, what motivates people, and it really varies by context. So for those of you, it seemed like there's some people that work with UX writers and content strategists and product writers, but not a lot of you. So for those of you that will one day, hopefully sooner than later, work with writers, I want to share some tips from what I've learned as a UX writer. And when I was hired at OpenTable, I was the sole writer working both on the restaurant side and on the product side, which when I think about it now, is absolutely insane. But we could use several writers on each side of our marketplace. But I want to glean what I've learned and share some of those takeaways with you. And oftentimes what we learn is by learning from what not to do. And so I'm going to start with that. So what not to do is to think of content as secondary to design. If you do that, this is what your process will look like. When you have your meeting kickoffs, you'll have a project manager there, and actually at OpenTable, there'll also be designers and engineers, but used to be, not product writers. And so when you take that approach, you're going to run into some challenges. 3 of those challenges is that copy becomes a blocker. And this is so common. And because it takes time to develop the words, even though it can look very simple, even if it's just 2 words, it can take time. There can be user testing involved, research. So oftentimes what I would hear in the early stages of my career at OpenTable is, well, let's move forward anyway. We want to get this out. We don't want copy to be a blocker. And then people would say, well, it really doesn't matter that much. It's just a couple of words. As we saw from the Haiti earthquake fund, it does matter. And a couple of words do make a big difference. The other thing that you're missing out is that you're not giving yourselves an understanding of what content strategy is and the value of people that focus on it. So there's not an understanding of, like, if you include the writers earlier on, they can actually influence the direction that both the design and the project takes. But you're missing out on that. So instead of doing that, here's what to do. Think of content as a part of design. It's inherent to design. It's not separate. And actually, I want to back up one screen and touch on one point. When I say content, oftentimes Brittany and I refer to it as copy, as language, but content is also video. It can be, it's any way, it's more than words. So I just want to make sure I make that point because that's an important point. But when you think of content as being a part of design, that means that the UX writer becomes involved in the project in its much earlier stage. And that's what this looks like. So some tips to remember are to involve writers from the beginning. It's really important that they're there at kickoff meetings because they get to hear about scoping. And this is another thing. When the PMs would talk about project scoping, the time frame that it's going to take, they might say like, oh, a day or 2 for copy. Well, it can take a lot more time than that. And so that's when copy became a blocker because there wasn't an understanding of what it took for me to deliver something that really was respectful, both of the design and of our users. So make sure you involve writers from the beginning. Be patient. It's a process, not an event. And the thing about that is, again, there's user testing, there's iterative writing, just like with design, we iterate on language. The other thing to keep in mind is it's important to think about where you will have the most impact, you as a writer, or where your writer will have the most impact. And so there's always more, there's more work. I would love to be able to touch everything that goes out the door. I'm a bit of a control freak in that way, but it's just not possible. It's not feasible. So I really needed to look at where can I focus my time and energy in order to be able to have the most impact. And it's not always focusing on product. What it also means is developing standards. So when I'm not able to work on project, I can point our designers and our PMs to some standards and give them considerations in terms of what they should think about when they're writing copy themselves. And lastly, keep in mind that we're making things together. We're a part of the team, and we need to trust each other's skill set. Now, as designers and engineers, the benefit that you have is that no one can just pick up software and start, writing code or start designing a product. But with words, we all have access to that. We all have access to language. We can all write. And it's really important to understand that the writers have developed a skill set over time, and it's rooted and grounded and found a lot of foundation. So make sure that you trust each other's skill set, because in the end, when you allow and help each other do your best work, what that means is that the people that use the product will also have a better experience and a more humanistic experience. So, given that we're in the food side of the world, we like to end with dessert. And so part of that is giving you some resources that as you move forward, things to consider, books, websites, podcasts, conferences. And so I'll leave this here so you can take a photo of that. And I think if we're sending this out as a link, you can all access that because these are live links. There's a ton of resources. These are just a few things, but definitely worth looking into. Thank you.
So in thinking about the human condition, I just wanted to check if people wanted a 5-minute bathroom break. We've been in here for about an hour. I know it's really hard to get in and out of some of these rows, but I guess if you do, yeah, thumbs up. Yeah, a few people. So 5 minutes. There's bathrooms here on this floor, over there, and upstairs. If you go towards where you were entering, but take a right. But keep it tight. 5 minutes. We have another presentation right after this, and then the panel, so you can ask some questions and stuff like that. So, timing you. 5 minutes. So around 7:38. Thank you. 2-minute warning, giving you an extra 2 minutes.
Hi, everyone. If I can just ask everybody to come back to your seats and just bring your eyes back here. I'm going to give you a few seconds. Okay, cool. Our next talk is going to be by Alkis, who is our UX design lead, and she's going to be talking to us about user research.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Alkistis. I'm so excited to have you all here for Ladies at UX event. And I'm going to start just by saying that I think retrospectives are awesome. I think a retrospective is an opportunity to take work that you've already done and effort that you've already invested and actually make it into a learning and make it into something valuable to take into the future. So I've been at KAYAK for 2 years, so I think that was a great timing to actually do a retrospective of my journey here, especially in evangelizing user research, and present to you that journey in 4 stories. And these 4 stories are going to be lessons in adaptability. So starting with the first story, which is about adapting to a new team. So when I came to KAYAK, I came into a vaguely designed UX role with a lot of predetermined ideas of what UX is for myself. So the first lesson that I had to learn was that I was bringing some tools, but I needed to learn how this team needed these tools used. So I had a lot of conversations with the team here. And of course, one of the questions, so I realized that people were very knowledgeable on the product and on flights and hotels and cars and things that are very technically difficult, but they also had a lot of questions about the users. So this was the site, 2017. And this is a question that came up most of the times. Who are our users? Can you help us figure out who our users are? And the expected answer that came most of the times of this conversation, I don't know if anyone has any guesses. Who are our users? Something else? There was a user case. Huh? Everyone. So that was funny because it was making my UX senses tingle a little bit. I was like, we can't design for everyone because then we're not designing for no one, really. But with time with the team, I understood what that everyone meant, and it meant travelers. Everyone could be a traveler, and our mission as a company is to help people experience the world through traveling and dining. And what I realized was that the user research that needed to be done was more on the user behaviors rather than trying to define a target demographic that we had. So I worked on a project that, in order to define user behaviors, I created a user journey, a mapping of a user's travel journey, and I shared that with the team. And I was very excited because I could see all the opportunities in the user journey. And I also got crickets from the other side, like people were not really responding to it in the way that I thought they would. And this is what my user journey looked like. So after I started getting some feedback on it, I realized that I made a mistake, which was I didn't treat my work as a UX challenge. I didn't actually consider the UX limitations that my target users might be facing, which was, for example, time limitations. They didn't have the time to go through all this information that I was so excited about. They wanted to get the gist of it and understand what my user research was about. So I put some more work into it, and I made it look like this. And I actually got the response I expected. And it wasn't about making it more pretty, but it was about using the UX elements that our team needed to hear. It was about emphasizing on the opportunities. It was about creating those key moments in the user's journey. So part one, what I learned was, first of all, adapting to a team is critical. You have to learn the language and understand what the UX needs are. But secondly, it's your responsibility to know how to communicate your work. You are UX designers, and your superpower is actually being able to relate to the target audience. So don't forget that when you're communicating your work as well. So moving on to story 2, which was adapting to lean user research. And if you ask anyone at KAYAK, one thing that we pride ourselves on is being a lean company. We have a lot of a startup culture, which reflects on a lot of good things, like the opportunity to have a lot of impact, and not a corporate culture. But it also meant this for me, which had a negative connotation because it just meant user research without resources. And that perception for me for lean user research changed when I went to a conference that had a 3-hour workshop. And during these 3 hours, we were supposed to do a design sprint with a team that we had just met. And we're working, time is ticking. And as we're starting to wireframe during our last precious 30 minutes, someone says, okay, we need to define the persona we're actually designing for. So we stop our progress and we start talking about this persona who we named, and we said where they live, where they work, when they graduated, and they have no kids. And after we spent a lot of time there, then we moved on to wireframing because we didn't have time and we never looked at it again. So for me, the lesson there was that was not relevant at that point. So it was not necessary. And I also discovered one of my UX pet peeves, which is personas that look like this. A lot of details, like their favorite browser and their operating system, the screen resolution, and everything that I need so much time to actually read and learn to relate to. And 3 reasons why I don't like these personas. First of all, they take a lot of time to build unless you randomly put information there, which is what I did for this one. Secondly, they take a lot of time to read. And if you think about story number 1, then your team is probably not going to read them and learn about them. And thirdly, they might not be as believable because you're pretty much making up a full character. So let me show you another example. These are the persona cards that our Australian colleagues use in Hotels Combined. And what I love about these persona cards is that they're very simple. They have 3 characteristics that these personas have. They have a rating for the things that they care about for hotels in particular, and a couple of codes to make them more human. They also have cards that have to do with their travel event. Why are they traveling? And the good thing about these cards is it takes about 2 minutes to understand this persona and to relate it to something that you probably know. And also they're flexible enough to create a great tool for brainstorming, for example, which is one of the sessions that we'll use this for. So to summarize story number 2, process and structure are great, but they're even more valuable when you know when to use them and when to break them. Otherwise, you're just applying a cookie cutter solution to everything. So part 3, which was adapting to scaling. And the good thing that comes out from evangelizing user research is that more people ask for it. The bad thing is that more people ask for it, and you don't necessarily have the resources to do it. So I found myself in a situation of being the bottleneck. Instead of facilitating it, actually slowing it down. But thankfully, I got a colleague, and we were able to work together. So what's interesting was that I expected the biggest advantage of this collaboration to be how much of a work culture, and work fit she was. But actually, the biggest advantage were the things that she was doing differently from me. And in particular, I was very process-oriented. Like, I cared a lot about legal NDAs, approvals, budgets, that kind of stuff. She has more of a just do it mentality, which was exactly what I needed. And the right balance made us do a lot of new things. So while we worked together, we found like an external recruiting site that accelerated research. We did a bunch of new workshops, and we got more teammates involved than ever before in user research. So she eventually went to another opportunity, but she left behind a momentum that we were really excited to work with. So part of the learning of story 3 is, especially if you're scaling your team right now, try to find someone who works a little differently than you, because that's actually going to accelerate your learnings and also extend the reach of your team. And part 4, story 4, adapting to strategy changes. So when I went back to a team of 1, basically, we got into the Prometheus stage, which was we wanted to keep that momentum. I couldn't go back into being the bottleneck of user research, so we want to get more people involved. But how do you get more people involved, which is not as simple as giving tools and expect them to be used? So what was really valuable at this stage was doing a lot of hands-on workshops. An example of that is an empathy mapping that we did with the flights team. And I love this exercise. We brought 3 users in, we split the team up, and they talked to them, and they ended up with the says, things, does, feels mapping. And this is our debrief after one of our engineers talking about how this user is comparing flights and what's their system about making sure that she chooses the right flight. And the impact of this empathy mapping was obvious the week after, because we had the design sprint. And during that week, people kept referencing to these users by name. So I love that. It meant that it was basically a real persona card. Users kept going back to it and relating solutions to a project to a particular person. Another thing that we invested time in was workshops. And in particular, workshops, not necessarily on how to do user research, but most importantly on how to talk to users. So we did a workshop on, with a few rounds of a workshop on how to conduct user research. And we went through the main things like, again, blackout on this point. The main things, which is, guiding the user without leading them, making them feel comfortable, and also asking unbiased questions. So the good thing about doing workshops like this is that you can put a lot of time in the people of your team talking to each other, and most of the time actually should be spent like that. So we split them up, and we had them interview each other, and also interview each other pretending to be certain scenarios or personas. And that really helped to bring out some things that are more difficult or some learnings about how to conduct user interviews, which led us to the final thing that we did, which is the user testing and ice cream. So we offered ice cream, and that attracted KAYAK employees and KAYAK tenants. And we set up an area where we had a bunch of people pretty much user testing their work, their current work. So what that actually helped do was, first of all, create a casual environment where user testing was just practiced. It was also a safe place for people who weren't sure about their user interview conducting skills to feel safer and do it. And another thing that was great about this event was that it wasn't team specific. So we couldn't delay the user testing because the team wasn't ready or because they moved on to another project, which is something that happens very easily here. So people force themselves to find the project to test. And even that as a process was very valuable. Just bring some things out and make them aware of how valuable that can be. So if you're also at the stage, at the Prometheus stage, where you need to pass on the flame of user research, try to do so with very practical workshops and very practical exercises. So, retrospective. One, know your target audience, which is your team, speak their language, and treat your work as a UX challenge. Secondly, process is useful, but you have to know when to break it. 3, if you're scaling your team, invest in diversity of work. And 4, if you're passing on the torch, make sure that you get some hands-on time with your team and with users. Thank you. All right, next stage.
So it's getting close to 8. I know you guys probably have evening plans. We did have a panel as this last part, but what we're going to do is probably bring us all out. I'm sure there's questions for everyone. We've seen some 4 great talks so far tonight. So let's bring our speakers out, and we'll be here for questions for the next 5 minutes or so if you guys have them. And then, we'll still be around to answer some questions, but we just want to make sure that there was time for all of us together here to be open for that. And thank you for sitting and staying and being here for the last 2 hours so far. Thank you. All right. So I might introduce myself first. My name's Laura. I am the Director of Product Design here at KAYAK. I started here about 5 years ago. Aleks actually was part of the hiring team, and she's been a designer here for 5.5. We were a team of 4 designers 5 years ago, and it's now around 16 or so in the KAYAK Pacific label, but up to 30 if you include OpenTable and hotels combined, and the different offices we now have around the world. So just to kind of run through a lot of people here actually. But does anybody have any questions so far? You've seen a lot of things. We've talked about user testing just now. We've talked about writing for UX. We've talked about personal stories and also accessibility, just to give you some reminders. Any questions? Yeah.
Just curious what tips you may have for anyone trying to break into product design or UX.
As a hiring manager, I can answer some of that. I think, at least I'll tell my own story. It was kind of funny when I started at KAYAK because I was coming from being a creative director at an advertising agency. And when I saw the posting that was here, it was actually for a product manager. This company didn't know what designers actually were, but the job description was a design description. I was like, that's interesting. Let's go talk. And this is 5 years ago, and like UX and UIs, still it was a real thing then, but maybe different names for it. But for me, that story started by leaping on something that was a little weird and actually just talking to people about it. I think these events are great too for networking, because you might not know exactly where your right fit is, but like you stood up earlier, and there's a perfect place for you somewhere where you are that combo between UX and SEO, and that's awesome. That's at least one tip I can have. Anyway.
So actually, I'm hiring. I was hiring designers, so I do also have some tips. And I came from actually a branding background. So KAYAK was my first product design job. And I think the big tip is, if you're coming from design, just if you have an excellent portfolio and the projects and how you formulate and think about design problems, if it's there, and as a hiring manager, I can see the thinking, I think that's more important rather than having like a concrete product design experience. And the other thing is, Just start your own project too. There's like something that you're interested in and passionate about that demonstrates also, again, your thinking. That's more important. So rather than having like a concrete design experience.
Oh, I don't know if anybody else wants to add something, but as actually the youngest designer on this panel, I have to say that something that was really useful for me to do is look for organizations that are looking for designers. For example, I work with the Institute for Human-Centered Design, which again touches upon accessibility, user research, and working with non-privileged groups. And I think that just having this experience before walking into a job is really useful, and it really gives you a good basis for a conversation with the hiring manager. Any other questions?
So my question is more about accessibility. So we all know that accessibility also requires coding to be in a certain format, and you talked about how you made certain changes to include accessibility. So did you have challenges in having the dev team go back and recode everything in order to include accessibility that was not there before?
Yeah, I can start with some of that. Yes, it's a challenge at first, and because you can't just start from the design side and get excited about it. Colors are one half of that equation, and so it started. We actually had engineers really excited about it 2 or 3 years ago who were trying to get it done just from the engineering side, and they're hollering and they're by themselves, and once we started we were starting to hear it, and I think we talked about it's an organizational problem, and so we started our efforts on the design side, and we're working with the engineers currently to make everything new be better. As we were fixing that, we're also looking backwards because there's tons of small, tiny things. It's not just making the colors good. It's making sure the engineers know that every picture needs a tag. And the quality assurance there. There's a systemic problem if it's just one team trying to fix it by themselves. And so it's brutal, but we've got some good backing from the engineers. We've got it started on the senior engineer level, and now it's to VPs caring and insisting. And it was a both beautiful and annoying day when the engineer just said, no, I will not do this design because it's not the colors aren't contrasted enough, like you told me. So yeah, I mean, it's beautiful, but also I'll be back with a new mock, But like they said in the talks, you're not one, you're on a soapbox if it's by yourself. You have to do those conversations, get the team excited about it, show them why it matters, show them why it makes the business money to do this too in some cases, and go back and do the code and then make that special team that does it and focus and ownership over it. So
I think the way we handled it, it did start from an engineering. We actually hired someone who was focused on that first, and then he started forming a team actually around that. And now he has multiple people in there's a Slack channel, and he actually moved to our sister company now. But now there's multiple brands and multiple people. I'm in that Slack channel from a design perspective, and we're also putting processes in place where it's just part of our process, so we're not going back and fixing things. So designers have, for example, a checklist now where the things you have to consider when designing for accessibility. A part of it is also making sure your features are simple enough, right? So when you tap through the website,
very complicated calendar on our site, and we're toiling through it right now. Thank you.
Also, I want to add from the perspective of accessibility, there's another way that we can communicate the value of that to our users. And at OpenTable, we introduced on the restaurant profile side, we introduced the idea of sharing whether or not a restaurant has non-gendered bathrooms. Because for some people who are in transition or who don't identify in a binary way related to gender, it's a way of communicating to them. We see you and you're important to us, and we want to share information that's valuable for you. So accessibility is such a large, it's such a large umbrella, and there's so many ways to approach it. And the same thing for Brittany and I, and the way, what words we use. And the painful thing, like accessibility is very important to me, but the painful thing is sometimes I introduce copy or suggest copy that has a bias that I'm not aware of. And that's why, to your point, Laura, to the point about it takes a team. It takes all of us to help each other understand what we're not seeing. So it really is collective work.
Related to thinking of copy in another way, what would be your opinion on developing content strategy for multiple languages, or even just regional differences of United States or Canada or Europe markets? Obviously, OpenTable and KAYAK influence a lot of people.
There we go. Yeah, I mean, since we are a global company, we do have to definitely keep that in mind. And a lot of times projects are moving so fast that it's usually kind of the last thing we do. But I don't know about you, Jen, but I've been trying to make a conscious effort of using a plugin called SmartLing. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's on Sketch. It's basically a live way to see what copy you're creating, what it will look like in other languages, and seeing how it will wrap, and seeing just the language impacts it'll have in different regions. And so I know German is a particularly long language, so we do account for that when we are writing, and we do see which markets we're going to be tapping into and how we'll have to translate amongst those.
In addition to that, it's so we have people that focus specifically on translations, because localization, it's not enough to just translate something into another language. You really need someone who's a native speaker or very fluent that really understands the subtlety of the language. So here's just a really simple example of that. I focus based mainly on the English, the written word, because I'm not fluent in other languages. But even when I was writing copy that was being used in the UK, initially we used to say, we would talk about making a reservation. And I thought, well, that's really easy for everyone to understand. But in London in particular, they told us, we don't refer to it as reservation, we call it a booking. And so even though we share the same language, when you localize, there are different ways that people can use the same language. So it's not even about going from one language to another. It's about going from one area to another area. And the more that we can sound like we're from that area, the more successful we are. So it's a great question, and it's a whole nother area of specialty.
Yeah, an example at KAYAK that was similar to that. We were doing something called the watch list. And I think the first Russian translation was the inspection list, or it was very ominous. And we're lucky. Our head of content strategy is here in the audience, Jamie. Hello, if you want to grab him later. So we do have a team in our Berlin office with localization specialists, doing the translation. But what we do with our content specialists is he goes over and he does workshops with them to help empower them to understand what the brand is and how they can then take that something that might be in English and translate it, be empowered to translate it in the right context for their locales. And it's really nice and great to have a big team that can do that. But some of the early things you can do are try running it through translation, try doing some of those things if you don't have the bigger organization to help with that. But.
To add to that, because our team is so diverse, for example, that watchword, I'm Russian speaking, so I was like, yeah, this is not the right translation. So we have a very international group of people, so a lot of times people do catch some of these things. Well,
Go on there.
So this question is for Alkistis. I wonder, like, it seems that you talked about a series of methods that you use to evangelize, like research, to kind of mobilize more teams in the company to do research. I wonder which one of the method has been proven more more useful or effective, or if there is one that has better feedback than the others. Just curious.
Good question. I wouldn't use only one because it doesn't cover everything. Like the internal user testing that we did was mostly usability testing. So it wasn't enough time to actually understand the motivations of our user, the way that the empathy mapping achieved that. Like our team was referring to the users and they understood what their motivations were. That's not the same effect that the internal user testing had. Another problem with the internal user testing is that it is internal, so it is potentially creating a feedback loop because the people here are kind of familiar with Kayak, even maybe a little less if they're not working on the product, but they still are. However, it is my favorite because we managed to get so many user sessions happening and so many people excited about doing it. So yeah, we need everything, really. Sorry if that doesn't help.
Okay, cool. So I think it's if anybody has any last questions, okay, you got it. Wait, there's two, so you first, and then we'll.
I just have a quick question about the content strategy and the design strategy. How will they combine together? Because I know, like for example, OpenTable, you work with thousands, maybe millions of restaurants, and sometimes you need to provide the users with the information of the restaurants. And most of the cases, I guess, like the restaurant they provided the information are going to show to the users, and you cannot, like, it's not possible to edit all the content for every single restaurant. And how will you, like, maybe sometimes the copy, the restaurant that they provide is just bad, really, really bad. And it's just like bad, like writing and content. And how will you combine like design strategy and the content strategy to make it better?
That's an excellent question. I'm very impressed that you could dial into that level. Because that happened for us. We initially had no parameters, the designers didn't create any parameters around guiding restaurants in terms of what information they should include for the restaurant profile. So there was a lot of variance. Some people wrote way too much copy. Others wrote a sentence or two, and there were misspellings, which drove me crazy because then it's a reflection on us and it's also a reflection on the restaurant, and it conveys, if I see something that is misspelled, I think like, oh, they're not paying attention to detail. I want to go to a restaurant that pays attention to detail. So it was a case where we released it that way, and then we recognized by seeing what restaurants submitted that we needed to provide some guidelines. So it was a collective effort, both on my part, the content side, and also the designers, about how we could guide the restaurants. And we don't want every restaurant description to sound the same. We want a level of personality to come through, that kind of thing. But we did ask guiding questions, and then in the form field also limited the character count. And so oftentimes it's a collaborative effort, and it's not the way things can surface and problems can surface, so many different ways. But what is important is that we work together and get in the same room together. Is that part of why you want to involve people who focus on early? Because there's an opportunity to give input. And had I been at an earlier meeting when they were talking about this, I could have said that, but I wasn't there, and that's okay. I don't need to be there for every reason, but then we move back.
think you had one more. No. Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. I want to keep everybody here forever. But I think we'll be hanging around here for a little bit longer. Either come down to here to see us, or we might meander up there for some drinks and food. But thank you for being here, and then feel free to reach out to us as well. And I'll put the mic down. Thank you.